Good morning, Monco, and welcome back to our Adult Sunday School Online. It is June the 14th, 2020, which means we are fast approaching summer. And if you are not familiar with who I am or what this video is, and you're not watching it as a part of the normal Sunday morning stream from the Michael Bible Fellowship, my name is Charles Foster. I'm the teacher for the Adult Sunday School, and we have been doing a biblical survey in our class, looking at the big picture of the various books of the Bible. So we've gone through those first 5 books of the Pentateuch, the Law, the Torah, those 12 historical books, all the books of wisdom and poetry, and that's where primarily we went online since the time of quarantine. And now that we are coming out of that, we are in the books of the major prophets. We've already done Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, and today we are doing the book of Ezekiel. So as we're doing the book of Ezekiel, we're going to begin with a short video clip from Pastor Landon, who we're familiar with, that's going to set the tone for what we're going to do today. So let's take a look and take a listen.
Ezekiel was 25 years old when he and his wife were taken from their home and land into exile in 597 with 10,000 other Jewish people. He prophesied in exile from the summer of 593 to April of 571. Ezekiel might be the craziest book in the whole Old Testament. Only Psalms, Isaiah, and Jeremiah are longer, but no book in the whole Bible contains more left turns and crazy imagery. I love it. I call Ezekiel the performance art prophet because God had him live his prophecies. Many others are visions, and he was also given a virtual tour of the temple, but okay, we're not there yet. Chapters 1 to 3 is the call of the prophet. Chapters 4 to 24 is the departure of the glory. Chapters 25 through 39 is judgment on the nations, and 40 through 48 is the return of the glory. Okay, let's get started. Chapters 1 through 3 contains the appearance of the glory and the calling of Ezekiel. Ezekiel sees visions. He sees creatures with faces, flying wheels within wheels, creatures flying below a crystal expanse, and their wings, they sound like rushing water. And over all of it, he saw a throne with a flaming sapphire silhouette surrounded by rainbows. Ezekiel would see this same vision of God 2 more times. He saw God, and he fell down on his face. God sent him to speak and prophesy and perform for the people. God called him a watchman and fed him a sweet scroll.
Excellent overview, as it always is with Pastor Landon. And one of the last things he showed there is that he said Ezekiel had to eat a sweet scroll. And that literally is what he had to do. He was commanded by God to eat a scroll, the kind you would roll out right on and read, and it had a sweet taste for whatever reason to him. Ezekiel is called to, as you saw in the clip, a lot of kind of far out, weird, whatever you want to say, strange things. But God has his purposes in it because he's trying to convey to a people who has refused to simply listen to everything he's been trying to tell them through simply his word. So Ezekiel has to do pantomime, acting out, all of these different things to get this rebellious people's attention. And that's what that's really about. As we're going through this outline, we're going to do those first 2 sections, the call of the prophet and the departure of the glory today for our Sunday school. And then probably next week, we'll touch on the last 2 parts as it relates to the judgment and the return of glory and what that means in Ezekiel part 2. Let's get started in chapter 1, verse number 1. The word says, "Now it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day," very precise by Ezekiel, "that I was among the captives by the river Chebar." And the river Chebar is where, when the Babylonian soldiers would capture people and take them back to Babylon, often they would stop off at this area of the river Chebar and the land around that, which actually was like a slave or workstation. So a lot of people would stay there for a while and work, and they were under Babylonian rule. And that's where Ezekiel is, as you see right there. The heavens open up, and he saw a vision from God, and he is age 30, as it says. On the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's, not Jehoiakim, but Jehoiachin's captivity, the word of the Lord expressively came, right? So it came very clearly to Ezekiel the priest. Ezekiel was being trained to be a priest. He's the son of Buzi, which means that his father was a priest. He's being trained to be a priest, but he can't fulfill that role because at age 25, as Pastor Landon indicated, they're taking over. They're taking to Babylon. He's supposed to assume that role at the age of 30 as a priest, and he can't because there is no temple around. But God has something even more powerful in store for him than the role of a priest. As it says, the hand of the Lord was upon him because he's going to raise him up as a prophet and speak to his people. So, if you look at the scripture, going through that same chapter 1, it says, I looked and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal. And that's Ezekiel's attempt to describe as he's being taken to this vision of the throne of God, this wheel and wheels, right? This creature, cherubim, right? The cherubims that have this kind of like four-faced or four-headed kind of description that he's trying to give. And we'll get into what those four faces mean later when we do kind of go back to some things in the book of Numbers. And even when we go to the Gospels, you're going to see them again. But on top of all that is the throne of God, God in his presence. And a lot of people see this and read this and think this is actually UFOs in the Bible. And I'm not just saying that. They think, okay, will, something, this is really strange. Therefore, UFOs exist because they're even in the Bible. And that's not true. Some people think Ezekiel just was on something or drinking something when he wrote it because it appears to be so far out. But that's not what it's about. What it's about is this. God is showing, just as he showed to John in the book of Revelation, a description of what the throne of God is like. He's showing the glory of God, the majesty of God, the power of God to his servant Ezekiel, because he knows, Ezekiel, you're going to have such a revelation of me to do the things I've called you to do against those folks that I'm calling you to do it for. And that's why Ezekiel needs to see such a clear understanding of who God is. This also should dismiss any kind of cherub imagery that we have of the cute little baby, the kind of Cupid looking thing where they can, you can kind of punch them in the stomach and they look all cute and everything. I should say poke them in the stomach. You should be punching a baby in the stomach. But cherubs are not babies with wings. Case closed. All right. As we move on to this second part, which entails a lot more scripture from 4 through 24, we're going to look at some of the text here as the glory is departing the children of Judah here, because what you have essentially is three things going on. Because we've studied them differently as we studied the books, but remember, Daniel was already taken, so he's beginning to establish himself in the Babylonian government, if you know the story of Daniel. Ezekiel is still back here, kind of on the ground level with those who've been taken into captivity. And at this point, the temple hasn't been burnt down. So back in Jerusalem, Jeremiah is still on the scene trying to preach to those folks. And of course, we know, just like Ezekiel, they're not going to listen either. We're going to get an understanding of this second portion right here and some of the things I just said by listening to Pastor Lambert again. And as we listen to Pastor Landon, sorry about that, Pastor Landon Lambert is back here in Philadelphia. He's going to give us an overview of this second portion that we're going to be doing. So let's take a look and listen right now.
4 through 24 are the departure of the glory. All of it is reasons and exhortations and pictures of the departing glory of God from Israel. In chapter 4, there's a symbol of the siege. God commands Ezekiel to lay on his side for 390 days at a time, cooking his food over poop. He's the performance art prophet. I told you guys, Kanye West would love this guy. You mentioned Kanye West in the last 2 videos. In chapter 5, he's asked to cut his beard out and scatter it as a picture to the Jewish people. In chapter 6, he prophesies against the mountains, stomping and clapping his hands. There's a lot of other performance art prophecies that God commands later in the book. To pack his bags and dig a hole to leave the city, not mourning over the death of his own wife, taking sticks and writing messages on them, prophesying to the mountains of Edom and Israel. These all symbolized the destruction of Jerusalem, the punishment of the people, all super specifically and lined up with each commanded action. Okay, if you think that was complicated, we're just getting started. Chapters 8 through 11 are visions of the temple. So God appears to him as a half metal, half fire man. There's people just worshiping idols. There's 25 men worshiping the sun. There's a secret underground society of evil agnostics forsaking God for idols. There's a lot of wild imagery. There's a guy clothed in linen marking the foreheads of the righteous so that they will be spared when the Babylonians invade the land. In chapter 10, the glory of the Lord leaves the temple. It's like the reverse end of Exodus. In chapter 12 through 24, there are refutations of popular sayings among the people. It's like anti-proverbs. They're maxims that the people believed that weren't from God, and it's mixed in with the condemnation of false prophets, elders, and the mockery of Israel.
Kind of an interesting picture of Pastor Landon there to pause on, because he showed so many and touched on so many just weird things that you see in this book of Ezekiel, which is why a lot of people have problems reading it. But it's just God showing himself in a very unique way. So as we go on into this section here, number one of the things that stands out to a lot of people here, either if you're hearing it for the first time or read it before and it kind of didn't make sense, is this sense of God telling Ezekiel to essentially cook some food over poop, right? If you look at it in the actual text, it says, eat the food as you would a loaf of barley bread, bake it in the sight of the people. So you can't be hiding back in your house cooking it. You're going to do this in front of everyone so they can see what you're doing, using human excrement for fuel. Now, Ezekiel does kind of allow himself to be able to do it with cow dung. So that's what he uses. But nevertheless, he still is using feces. He still is using some type of excrement to cook his meal. And as weird and really disgusting as that sounds, when I was looking this up, this actually exists today. In Kenya, I was seeing, this is from a YouTube clip where, as you see, bowel movement briquettes. They take feces, they take manure, whatever you want to call it, and they let it dry out. Once it dries out, they mix it with sawdust, and then from that point on, they kind of, I guess, allow it to form into these briquettes, and they use it to cook things. And they were saying on the video that it actually lasts longer and cooks longer and provides more fuel than the traditional briquettes that we're using. Chapter 22. With chapter 22, there is so much in this section here that we're going to kind of break down now. And what that means is, look what it says. Her princes. Now, this is talking, the her is Jerusalem. The princes are the governmental leaders. In this case, it would be the kings, right? So her princes, the kings, in her midst are like wolves tearing the prey, to shed blood, to destroy people, to get dishonest gain. Essentially, their leaders are not serving the people, they're just simply serving themselves and their own agenda. As you continue, right, there we go. Her prophets plaster, and now we're looking at the religious leaders, right? Her prophets plaster them with untempered mortar, seeing false visions, divining lies before them, and saying, thus says the Lord God, when the Lord God has not spoken. When it says the prophets has plastered with untempered mortar, just picture if you're building a house or a wall or something, you have bricks or you have those big cinder blocks. If the mortar that you put in there is not very strong and resilient, that wall is coming down. And that's the weak foundation that these prophets, these false prophets, were quote unquote prophesying on, because they're lying, they're giving false visions, and they're saying that God has spoken when the Lord hasn't even spoken at all to them. See, these false prophets were coming against what Ezekiel was doing. Ezekiel is challenging the people to turn back to the Lord, please. And by that, I mean, this is what's happening. When he's saying turn back to the Lord, remember, Jerusalem is still there. This is the second siege. So he's saying turn back to the Lord to avoid the ultimate outcome that we all know what's going to happen because we've already studied the book of Jeremiah. But they won't listen because these false prophets are saying, don't listen to him. It's going to be fine. Our God still loves us. Yeah, we've been taken over now, but our God is going to deliver us like he's delivered us before with the Assyrians in the past, with Elijah and everything. And we'll be back home soon. Doom is not here. This is the kind of false prophecy that we often hear today, and not related to something being destroyed, but just people telling people what they want to hear and not what they need to hear biblically. If you look down with the prophets again, it's described just like it is with the original princes or the governmental leaders. The roaring lion tearing the prey, devouring people, and they're taking the treasure and precious things. These religious leaders are about their own prosperity. Now, that sounds like a lot that's going on today. And I'm not saying every religious leader, but you know what I'm talking about when you see religious leaders who speak because we have itching ears. We want to hear what we want to hear, who talk about who get rich them own selves and often talk about others being rich too because the focus can't be on what God truly wants for us. And certainly the same is for the princes or the governmental leaders, whether it's at the city, local, state, or national government. There are politicians who are just there for their own dishonest gain. They're not about serving people. They're not about even enlightening people so we can come together. They're just about getting what they can get and doing whatever it takes, even if it means dividing people to get what they want out of it. And if you look at what it is in this picture, it's this sense of a void of leadership. And when you have a void of leadership, you're going to have something else fill that void. And it's usually very nefarious, very evil. And in Israel's case, it was just straight up sin, which is why they had their ultimate demise. Look at the last part that I'm showing you here. It says, look, the princes of Israel, remember the governmental leaders, each one has used his power to shed blood in you. And listen to this, in you they have made light of father and mother in your midst. Making light of, meaning in the Hebrew, that word means to mock, right? To mock the whole idea of father and mother. That was going on back in that culture. God had established the father, the mother, as the foundation of the family, and they're making light of it because they're hooking up with all kind of people sexually. They're doing all kind of things, and if that's not relevant to what we're talking about today, where we are quote unquote redefining the family, you can see how relevant this book is. Look what God also says. A lot of you are probably familiar with this text. I look for someone among them who would build up the wall and stand before me in the gap on behalf of the land so I would not have to destroy it. But here's the sad part, I found no one. What God's essentially saying is that if someone were to stand in the gap here and be raised up, what has to happen to Jerusalem might not have to happen because you could turn your hearts to me. But ultimately, they don't. And God knows they aren't. But this is more of His grace. He's trying to give the people the opportunity that they need to take. And the reason I did that is because this is so relevant to us now. You know what God is saying to them? He's saying, someone to stand before me means if I just had someone to come in my presence, to lay before me in prayer, not pray when you eat, not pray, every 6 months when you got to do the class or breaking the bread, but just labor before me and pray. And what? Pray for this nation, pray for Israel. Then I would not have to destroy the land. But unfortunately, he found no one. He had Ezekiel, he had Jeremiah back in Jerusalem, he had Daniel, he had certain individuals, but he could not get the people to turn from their wicked ways because their heart was already gone. That's, that's what he's saying to us today. He's looking for someone. And look, it says someone. It doesn't say a prayer group, a prayer chain, a denomination, a church. If I just had someone who would stand in the gap and pray for this hurting nation, pray for this divided nation. And I'm asking you, just like I asked my children back then, because it has to come from my children. I didn't go to Babylon before to look for someone to stand in the gap. So I'm not going to go to the world now. I'm talking to my people. I'm talking to my people who are called by my name. And if they would do what they need to do, you would see some healing. Let's look at Ezekiel's life, right? Number one, he's called to be a priest because his father is a priest, right? So all his life, he's been trained for that purpose. Meaning, he was 25 when he was taken into captivity. Probably since the time he was bar mitzvah as the son of a priest, he was beginning to learn certain things that he needed to know. He had to learn the different types of offerings, whether it be a burnt offering or a meal offering or a peace offering, all those different things. He had to go through the book of Leviticus back and forth as he learned about the different rituals, the different holidays, what you do with this Sabbath, with this piece, and these different feasts and everything. And as he knows all of that and is being prepared, now that he's 30, he can't do it. And why can't he do it? He can't do it to no fault of his own, but it's because of what others are doing. So he can't fulfill everything he's prepared, he's planned for because of some circumstance that's beyond his control. And as a result, that has to bother him because this is what his life expectation was. But what he doesn't probably realize until he sees that vision of God, that Ezekiel, I know you're praying for that, but I'm going to raise you up for something even greater than that because you're going to see visions of me like no other prophet has seen. You're going to have a clearer understanding of who I am and be able to convey that through this word I'm going to give you, that others who read this later are going to know who I am also. And God took that disappointment and changed it into something even greater. And this definitely relates to us. I made reference to this text that you see right here that was sent out on 3/11, March 11th. And remember, the quarantine officially began in this state on March the 13th. I made reference to this in one of the earlier Breaking the Breads I did when we were first online. Look what it says. This is my daughter Charity sending a text to my wife and I, and it says the prom is canceled, right? British exchange students aren't getting their money back. That's canceled. Play is canceled, and it was just a snowball effect. Prom is canceled, graduation is canceled. And by the way, my daughter did walk through her virtual graduation, if you would say walk through it. And so she is no longer a high school senior, but now a high school graduate. But if you look at what the text says, my wife responds to all these cancellations and says that she's so sorry to hear this. And she says to Charity, my daughter, you were born in the year of 9/11, what she was born 2 months after 9/11, and she graduated in the year of Corona, which is really some irony there because those are two landmark kind of milestone. I remember where I was when that happened kind of events. And she had two of them in the beginning, and now she's beginning to take her place in the world. And of course, you see the sad emoji. But just like Ezekiel, God is going to use this. See, because for this specific generation right here, where those graduates, they had planned, just like Ezekiel, to go through certain events, graduation, prom, and so on. Now, I know Ezekiel's was probably a lot more serious, but he still had expectations. And you know what? Just like Ezekiel, there were events that happened, and we're talking about here, Corona, that were outside of their control that changed all of their plans. But God is going to use that along with what's going on in the country now to raise up this generation of young people for such a time as this. Show you what we're talking about. Here's something that my daughter, who's a very gifted photographer, took a picture of my son Josh there, kind of shot it through a chain link fence right there, as you see, or whatever that kind of fence is. And you see that kind of image that it gets over there, and something she did with the camera to give it that type of imagery. And you see her post where she put down some of her thoughts, what she was going through, and that's not even all of them. And as a result, this was posted. She got 300 and something likes, and the organization that gets these, I think it's called, I think she said it was called Viso. they actually acknowledge this on the website because it does minister to her generation. She had music and everything in the background from Maverick City, a Christian group, and or I should say a Christian probably worship team. But that's how God is using that talent and that gift to minister to this generation during this time. I'll give you another example. My other daughter, Chloe, when she saw what was going on as a result of the George Floyd video and all the ensuing protests, and of course, the looting and everything that happened, like we spoke about last week, she put this Instagram on expressing some of her feelings. And as a result, she was asked to speak at a peaceful protest that our family went to last Saturday, and she had the chance to share her thoughts. And what was so amazing about this is that this entire event was organized, put together, planned, laid out, and directed by teenagers. And that's what I mean, how God's going to use them. Now, every teenager that spoke there wasn't a believer, but a lot of them were, and you could hear the gospel influence and the God influence in them. If we don't take God into this, the results that we want to have happen aren't going to happen because only He can change the hearts of some people who are involved in a lot of this. See, my generation, we had our George Floyd type of video, Rodney King. And when that happened in 91, and then they go to trial, and certainly it wasn't the time of social media that it is now. You saw the video on the news, you saw some talk shows talking about it, and that was pretty much it. Nobody was posting and all that kind of stuff. So you get your results as they go to trial in 1992. And even though there probably were 20 something police involved, some were getting their hits in, some were just standing around and watching, nobody was stopping it. The four main perpetrators who were really wailing and brutalizing Rodney King, they were found to be acquitted, not guilty essentially. And as a result, if you're not familiar with that, they essentially torched Los Angeles. Riots broke out, looting broke out, violence, National Guard, fires everywhere. But what's interesting is back then, you just kind of watched that on the news. You were frustrated. You were talking about it, but it didn't spread like this is spreading, like George Floyd is spreading. And I know, like I said, social media has a lot to do with that. But there is just something about the way this generation is with a heart for serving, with a heart for social change and social justice. But this has to be governed by the Holy Spirit. I'm talking about for our youth. Here's the last thing. It's kind of sad. Our generation, as I said, it didn't spread like you see all these protests popping out throughout the country, throughout the world, really. Because our generation, unfortunately, has some different priorities. And as a result, what you see today didn't happen then. If you happen to be 25 or older, the old heads, don't think because I directed this to the high school graduates and even the college students, teenagers, young adults, that this doesn't apply to you because it does. Because there are certain circumstances that you would find yourself in, just like Ezekiel, where this was beyond your control. And certainly that's happened with Corona, where you're in a situation you never thought you'd be in, but God can still use that for something greater too, if we all just yield to Him. And I'm talking to the church now. Um, Here's the other thing too. The reality is that as we're older and kind of live life a little longer, there are a lot of circumstances we're in that's totally our fault. And God is saying, I can take that too. Just let me begin to show you that I'm not just the God of second chances, but the God of multiple chances. Learn from what you experienced in the past and use that wisdom to help others. And let's just move forward. That's what he's saying to the church also. See, because the problem with the people that Ezekiel was trying to minister to is that they still had this comfort zone because the temple was still there back when Jeremiah was ministering. The Jerusalem is still there. And you know what? We're here, but it's not going to be long because the false prophets have told us this, and God's going to deliver us. So they had their mind on Jerusalem, on the temple, on getting back to the way things were. We just get into that temple, get into that church, getting back to our old routine, then things will be fine. And God is saying, no, turn your heart to me. If you turn your heart to me first, then when you return to that, you're going to be way more effective than you've ever been. And that's what he's saying to us. As we close, think about the last portion of what we're going to do today is chapter 24. And in chapter 24 is an account that Pastor Landon also mentioned too, where Ezekiel's wife um, dies. And he's told in 24, your wife is going to die, but he's also told you can't mourn her, which sounds almost like a very cruel thing to do. Look what it says. The word of the Lord came to me, O mortal, saying, this is God speaking. I'm about to take away the delight of your eyes from you through pestilence, but you shall not lament or weep or let your tears flow. Now, that's 24, right? It's obvious that Ezekiel loves his wife. She's the delight of his eyes, right? Ezekiel has a wife and a house and everything, even though he's doing all these weird things as God is calling him to do. It's not like Jeremiah where he was told, don't even get married. No, Ezekiel has that, but God is taking his wife away or allowing his wife to be taken away. And here's the thing. It sounds so cruel. And somebody looking at Ezekiel, seeing his wife die, knowing how much he cared about her, and seeing him not mourn, especially how you mourn in that culture, would be like, how can you be so cold and heartless? And you know what God is trying to show them through Ezekiel? That's just what you were to me. See, we were together. And essentially, he referred often to Israel as his wife. We were together, and you just put me away, and I essentially died to you, and you showed no remorse. You just acted like life just goes on. No conviction, no sadness, no anything. And you replaced it with all this other stuff. For as cold as you think Ezekiel was in this situation, that's what you were to me. He's also saying that to some of us too. We used to have this time of true fellowship, and now it's not there, and it seems like it doesn't even bother you. Come back. As we close, just think about some of the things that this strange book has begun to show us for this time. We're going to be doing Ezekiel part 2 next week. And as we do it, whatever God gives us, I know, as strange as some of these things are, it's going to be so relevant to who we are and what we're going through now. So, you want to read ahead, you can. You can start at chapter 25 and go through it, but also continue in your normal reading that we also hopefully have established during this time. Read it, study it, memorize it, meditate on it. We're talking about those proverbs, those psalms, whatever you're doing in your devotional time, and read it so you can hear from your Father. If you got any questions or comments, put them on the bottom of the YouTube page. I'll try to get back to you. But we're going to transition now. So as we transition, you'll hear a short musical selection like we typically do. And then you'll hear Brother Greg read, prepare us for the elements for our breaking of bread, our communion. Take care, stay safe, and we will see you the next time. God bless.